Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, let's understand what is MCP and how to use the concept of MCP in real time. This is very important. Understanding a concept, at the same time, understanding real time use case of the concept. And that's exactly what we are going to do in today's video. Trust me, after watching this video, you will never forget MCP. Let's get started. What is MCP? MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. However, you should first understand why MCP. Why did the concept MCP evolve and why it created a lot of buzz in the space of AI agents? To understand this, let me take a layman example. In 2025, there are two primary actors. One is software engineers, probably you and me. Other is AI agents or AI assistants. The funny thing is that both of them are trying to do the same thing. Main goal of software engineers is to implement the task for the organization. At the same time, main goal of AI agents is to implement the task either for the organization or someone who is using it. Although MCP is a concept that is related to AI agents, it is heavily inspired on how software engineers implement the task. Abhishek, are you serious? Yes. Let's try to understand. One of the day-to-day activity of software engineers is to interact with the applications, right? For example, a software engineer's main goal, or let's say you are a software engineer, one of your activity can be to create a repository on GitHub. Now, if you are given this task, quite obviously, you will use the user interface of GitHub because it's one single repository. You just sign into GitHub. If you already have an account, just sign in, navigate through the pages, and your repository is created within few clicks. However, if the same task is given to you, but this time to create 100 repositories, quite obviously, user interface is not a viable solution. So what you would do is you would go for application programming interface or APIs. So API is a standardized way for software engineers to automate the task, right? So what happens in this case? GitHub, which is the application, so they develop their APIs. So as a software engineer, you will not focus on developing the APIs, but GitHub as an application, it develops the APIs. And as a software engineer, probably you will use a REST client, or if you are good at programming, you would write a program. But the easy way is to use a REST client like Postman, for example. And this client use HTTP protocol to interact with the APIs. Now, this is standardized. What do I mean by that? You would do the exact same thing if I asked to create 100 Jira tickets, right? Or maybe if I ask you to create 10 EC2 instances on AWS, or maybe to create 10 virtual machines on Azure, your approach more or less would be the same. Step one, you would go to a REST client if you're not good at programming, right? And what does this REST client do? So it will use HTTP protocol, that is the get request, put request, delete request. And this HTTP protocol would interact with the REST API that is developed by these applications. So in 2025 or nowadays, every modern application, I mean, whenever somebody thinks that their application is used by the end users, they develop their APIs, right? Again, I'm trying to repeat this because The same concept is used in MCP and it is heavily inspired by this particular thing. There are three steps. Step one, software engineer would use a REST client, right? Step two, REST client will use a protocol called HTTP, and applications implement their REST API server. So the developers at GitHub, they develop their REST API server. Developers at Jira, they develop their REST API server. Developers at AWS, everybody would do the same thing so that the interaction of software engineers become standardized. Imagine if REST API concept did not exist. Even before REST, there used to be something called SOAP. Imagine such standardization did not exist. The problem would be then GitHub would say to automate repository on GitHub, you need to follow these 10 different steps. Jira will come up with its own different steps. Because REST does not exist, everybody will provide their own protocol, or they will develop their own protocol, they will develop their own server, and the interaction for software engineer would be writing code, and this code will be completely different compared to this code. Right now, it's not the case. The code or the clients that software engineers do are standardized. Now, the same concept is used in MCP. So when it comes to AI agents, as I told you, AI agents focus is also do the same thing, right? Using an AI agent, probably you would create repositories on GitHub, right? Or maybe you would interact with Jira, you would interact, let's say, with AWS, you would interact with Azure. So you would do the same things that a software engineer do. However, when it comes to AI agents, it comes with other challenges. Not only standardization, of course, standardization is required for AI agents as well. On top of that, one of the major challenges with AI agents is the context. As a software engineer, you know what you are doing. Although you're creating a repository, you know the backstory, why you are creating a repository, you know what permissions do you have with GitHub, you know what are your limitations with GitHub, you know the entire context of the request that you are making. But AI agents, which are using models or LLMs under the hood, they are not context aware, right? And it is also not very secure. So as a software engineer, you can use your password or you can use your API token to interact with GitHub because it's your responsibility. But when it comes to large language models or AI agents, it is not that secure to provide your credentials or your API tokens. What I'm trying to say, with AI agents, of course, you need standardization, just like how REST is a framework for software engineers. On top of that, security is one challenge and context awareness is the other challenge. And this problem is solved using MCP. Exact same thing. So what AI agents do? So they use MCP client, right? So AI agents or AI assistants, they would use the MCP client. And whenever you write a prompt, right, you define a prompt. So this prompt is taken by the MCP client and it converts your request into MCP format or the MCP protocol. Just like the REST protocol, MCP client converts your prompt into the MCP protocol, and this is taken by the MCP server. Now, who is implementing the MCP server? MCP server is implemented by the applications or the platforms. Just like how GitHub has developed their REST APIs, GitHub will develop their MCP server. Jira will develop their MCP server. AWS will have their MCP server. Azure will have their MCP server, right? So for the software engineer actors, the same applications have developed the REST APIs. Here, the same applications will develop MCP servers. And the protocol that we use in this case, so the AI chatbots, they come up with MCP client, where as a user, you provide a prompt, it is taken, and your request is converted into MCP protocol. Then your request is sent to the MCP server. That's it. It is this easy to understand. Why are we doing all these things, or why did MCP come into picture? Because imagine if such protocol does not exist. Just like how software engineers might have to write different code for GitHub, might have to write different code for Jira. In the same way, if a standardization is not available, one of your AI agents, let's say Claude Desktop, right? It might come up with different code to create a GitHub ticket or a GitHub repository. Then your GitHub Copilot workspace, it might come up with a different thing. Bold.new, it might come up with complete different code. So to have it and to also make this entire process secure, to make this entire process context rich, MCP as a protocol evolved. And it's super easy to use because although this might look complicated to you, just like how REST looks very complicated at the very first point, but if you understand this carefully, you don't need to write MCP server. Of course, I will tell you when you need to write an MCP server, but in general, for most of your activities, you don't need to write MCP server. It can be interacting with AWS, Azure, GitHub, anything. They will develop their own MCP servers. You don't have to define anything related to MCP protocol because this is a standardized protocol that is developed by Anthropic. In future, if they modify, they will modify the protocol. You don't have to do anything. Only thing that you have to do, just like how you are interacting with AI agents today, your AI assistant will already have the MCP client. You just need to enable it and you need to know how to use the MCP client, right? We will see that during the demonstration. So what we will do in the demonstration, I will show you using the concept of MCP, how you can create a repository or typically how you can interact with GitHub. Now your question can be, but Abhishek, when do I need to develop MCP server? Very, very simple. If you take the same example, as a software engineer, imagine you are a developer. When do you need to write your own REST APIs? You will only need to write your REST APIs. Imagine you are building an application, you are building an internal application, and this application is used by other people. Or maybe you want to automate something related to this application or the tool. Maybe some internal tool that you are developing for your organization. In the same way, if you want to use your AI agent to automate something related to your internal applications, your internal tools, or maybe your internal documentation portals, only then you need to write MCP server for your internal tools. Whenever you have a question related to MCP, just understand it is very similar to REST or HTTP and try to correlate it, right? 3 steps for REST API or traditional software engineering. One is REST client. Second is the REST protocol, which is HTTP. Third is the REST API server. Similarly, 3 steps for MCP, MCP client, MCP protocol, and MCP server. Now, saying all this, let's try to see how easy is it to use the MCP client. As I told you, we'll take this example. how to automate repository creation using GitHub, or how to interact with GitHub's MCP server. Abhishek, where can I find it? Like, if I'm talking about APIs, I know there is a place called Postman where I can find APIs of various applications. For now, MCP is still evolving. There is this GitHub repositories which has limited, or to some extent, if you go to this repository model context protocol, so you can find most of the MCP servers. So you can find different kinds of MCP servers, the officials one, third party ones, but still, there is no centralized hub at this point of time. This repository can help you to some extent. In this repository, you can find reference for GitHub. So this is GitHub's MCP server, and it is available on this particular location. Just search for GitHub organization and look for GitHub MCP server, or just look at the description in the link. So link in the description, and you can understand, how MCPs are evolving. This project was, or it's just 2 months old, and you can see 12.8K stars. So imagine the popularity of MCP. Okay, anyways, so if you go to this repository, there are steps available how you can use it. As I told you, the first thing that you need is a MCP client. There are two very simple MCP clients. One, you can use your Visual Studio Code, or second, you can just use your Docker. I'm sure many of you must be using VS Code. So let me explain the steps using VS Code. So how exactly you can use it as client, and how you can interact with the GitHub model context protocol server. So we will take a project, right? So I'll just open a random project. In your case, you can go for something that you're using in real time, maybe an application or something. And what I will do, so first thing, make sure you are using the latest version of Visual Studio Code. If you're using anything less than 1.99, MCP client doesn't work on your VS Code. So it is only supported from 1.99 or above. So let's say you're using an older version, just go to code, check for updates. It will instantly download the updates for you, and your VS Code is updated with the latest version. Okay, once you're done with it, just use Control Shift P or Command Shift P if you're on Mac. And you will find this Open User Settings. Click on it, and you just need to use the JSON that is related to your GitHub MTP server. Abhishek, where did you get this JSON from? It's not a rocket science. All that you need to do is go to the documentation of that MCP server. Again, it is same like REST API server, right? If you want to know how to interact with GitHub APIs, what you will do, you will just go to GitHub REST API reference. You will get a documentation site where they will have the complete steps. In the same way, with GitHub MCP server as well. So it says you to copy this particular JSON, usage with VS Code. So I'll just copy it, go back to my Visual Studio Code, and in this settings.json, using Command Shift P, I'll get this settings.json, and here I will just use it. What is it using? It is just using a Docker image. And when you first time start this MTP server, when you start this MCP server, and when you provide it with a prompt, it will ask you to provide GitHub API token. Because to interact with GitHub, you need a password or you need API token. You don't have to provide your password or API token in this JSON. When you run your first prompt, it will automatically give a pop-up, and within the pop-up, you need to provide the API token. But Abhishek, how can I get the API token? For different applications, there are different ways. When it comes to GitHub, just go to your GitHub account, click on the settings on your GitHub account, and within the settings, just go for developer settings, personal access token, classic tokens, and here you need to click on generate new token classic. And whenever you are creating any API token, keep in mind, grant it with the permissions that you need. Especially with AI agents, you have to be extra careful. Do not grant it with permissions that are not required to it. Just for your demo purpose, you can grant complete permissions and instantly delete the access token. Perfect. So going back, this is my VS Code. You can see that I have started the MCP server. It is in the running state. Once I'm done with it, I can just stop it to keep it more secure, right? And sometimes if it is not working, you can just restart the MCP server. For example, you just provided the API token, just restart the MCP server. Okay, what next? Then you will see this icon where click on open chat. So this will open a chat assistant on your Visual Studio Code. This is GitHub Copilot chat assistant. So what is the MCP client that I'm using? The MCP client that I'm using is not VS Code, but I'm using GitHub Copilot chat. This is my MCP client. If you don't have GitHub Copilot installed, just go to the extensions, search for GitHub Copilot and just install it. Perfect. Now by default, the AI assistant will not come in the agent mode. What you need to do in this ask section, you have three options: ask, edit, agent. Click on agent. Again, if you're using older version of Visual Studio Code, it doesn't have this support for Copilot agent. So you will not find it. So make sure you have 1.99. Okay. So you have this right now. Copilot is in the agent mode. It is also taken our settings.json. And at this point, you will see the tools button. So this is the tools button where it says these are the different options provided by your GitHub MCP server. So when you provide any prompt here, for example, the tool says there is one command called, let's say I want to create a repository. I'll just search for, yeah. So this is the create repository. So if I type a prompt as simple as create underscore repository, right? Maybe as a developer or DevOps engineer, you are automating this task for your organization where you want to create 10 repositories, 20 repositories, or somebody just came to you and told that, Abhishek, can you just create a GitHub repo? Instead of logging into GitHub, you'll just come here, you provide a prompt within the MCP client called create repository. Now, once you press the enter button, what happens? So it says, it seems like you want me to create a new repository. Please provide more details, such as the name of the repository and everything else. Okay, so I'll just provide more details to it. Create repository, and I'll just say name MCP demo repo. Okay, now it is saying, should I continue with it? Now what is happening? When I click on the connect or when I click on continue, it will use the MCP protocol and it will interact with GitHub's MCP server. Where did it get the details of the GitHub MCP server? That is exactly what we provided in the settings.json file. So this is the GitHub's MCP server and we are connecting it with using the token. Perfect. So I'll click on continue. It is working on the task. Okay, it says that my personal access token is not correctly configured. I think it is finding some permissions issue. Let me quickly check. So I just configured my credentials again, and I'll just try create repository one more time. And I will say name demo MCP server YT YouTube. So let's see this time. So it is still working on the task. It is asking, should I continue? Let's try our luck. Cool. So it says the repository demo MCP server YT has been successfully created. So now our AI agent used the MCP protocol and it created a demo MCP server. Let's see. I'll go back to my GitHub. So this is my GitHub. Let me look at the repositories. Cool. So it created demo MCP server YT. It just created, updated now. Similarly, what I can do, I can use all of these tasks, right? Here, there is a task for get code scanning alert, or I can get the file content, I can get the pull request content, issues contest uh, content, right? Everything that this MCP server supports. So if the MCP server is not supporting something, you cannot get that using model context protocol. Same is with REST API, right? So imagine you have developed an application. Okay. So that's why I'm saying whenever you have any questions with MCP, just go back to the concept of REST. So imagine AWS has launched a new resource called XYZ. For EC2 instance, there is a REST API. For S3 bucket, there is a REST API. But for XYZ, AWS hasn't launched the REST API. Now, you might be good at Go programming. You might be good at Python programming. You might be expert with the HTTP protocol. But if AWS does not support an API for the XYZ resource, there is no way you can automate this, right? So it has to first come from the product itself. Otherwise, you need to create this on AWS. Like you need to create API for the XYZ resource. If it's your internal application, you can do it. But for something like AWS, it's not that easy, right? So just remember this to conclude the MCP related concept. I know this is a very beginning of MCP. We will see MCP with Kubernetes. We will see MCP with Azure DevOps. In future videos, we will try to automate a lot of practices related to it. But because today is the first video, I would like to ask everyone to understand the concept. Go ahead, use the GitHub MCP server. You will find the links in the description as well. And create a repository just like I have shown in the video. So to conclude, MCP is a protocol that is heavily inspired from how software engineers implement their tasks. One of the way software engineers implement their tasks when they are dealing with applications. So they use the REST client, or if they are good at programming, they use some libraries within the programming language. And using this REST client, they use a protocol called HTTP. And using this protocol, they interact with the REST API server of that particular application. Similarly, what AI agents do, AI agents use MCP client, which in turns use the MCP protocol to interact with the MCP server. And this MCP server is developed by the applications itself. Only if you're working on your internal application, or if the application is very specific to your organization, you need to develop MCP server for your organization. Otherwise, you don't have to bother about the MCP server. You don't have to bother about MCP client. You just need to know how to use the MCP client, how to write the prompts. In some cases, how to provide a script to the MCP client. In future videos, we will learn Kubernetes MCP server. We will learn Azure DevOps MCP server. Similarly, AWS MCP server as well. For today's video, this is all what I have. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Let me know in the comment section if you understood the concept or if you have any questions. I'm happy to help. See you all in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.